morning, colleagues. My name is Sonto Kujo. I'm going to be the facilitator for this webinar for this morning. We are going to be having a masterclass. That is the topic is the challenges of governance in a complex world. Building bureaucracies that think ahead, manage black swans, and effectively deliver on national development priorities, as well as making sure that governments continue to function. And from the South African side, we are also looking at a number of participants that are going to take place in this webinar. Some of them that are registered are ministers, and we hope we can have a few of those that are attending today. Otherwise, we also have a number of our heads of departments that are going to be attending, whether it is from the provincial level, national level DGs, and then we also have the state-owned entities and municipalities from South Africa. The heads of those entities will also be participating. And what is going to be of interest today is that we are going to be joined by Mr. Peter Ho, who is going to share experiences that we can see whether we can learn from as South Africa, the experience of Singapore. I think that they are well known for having done very well in a number of areas. We will also, in the program later on, after Mr. Peter has presented the masterclass, which will take about 40 to 45 minutes, we will then request our DG in the presidency, Ms. Pindile Baleni, who will be a respondent. And then we will then also, after that, we'll ask Mr. Peter Ho to actually look at a number of questions that would have been posed and probably respond to a few. And then we will then, at the end of it all, then we will close. I would then, before I move forward, to say that in today's world, we live in a very constantly changing environment, be it in the area of technology, security, and then also issues such as extremism, cyber issues, and it becomes very interesting to see how we respond to those ones. Do they find us already geared up, having anticipated what is going to happen? And these phenomena present on their own set of complexities. What does this all mean for all the policymakers, to government, to bureaucrats? Are we able to adapt ourselves with all these changes when they bring different situations to us? Are we able to confront them head on and deal with the challenge, or we are even scared to actually adapt to the new situations as they present themselves? And then, of course, as I had mentioned earlier on, we live in a complex world, political systems that are forever changing, and our need for us to be able to adapt to that. Why do we sometimes get surprised when things don't go the way we had anticipated? Do we just withdraw and go back to our shells, or we take measures that are needed to charter the way forward? Can we still rely on policies to be the appropriate response to some of the situations? And I think that one of the recent developments has been the one of COVID-19. And I think that for many governments, it has shown how some have been found wanting and not ready to deal with that for a variety of reasons. And there are lessons to be learned from this. And we are hoping that with some of those, there are lessons that we can take forward as we move along to deal with these issues. I wouldn't even want to take much more time, because we only have a little over an hour and 15 minutes to deal with all these issues. And then, without wasting much time, I would request that column shows us on the screen the profile of Mr. Peter Ho. I hope that we can leave it there on the screen for a bit so that we see the credentials of the person who's going to present. Needless to say that he has spent 34 years in the public service. He has served in foreign affairs. He has been with intelligence. He has been also with with defense. And this alone, it tells you the number of diverse issues Mr. Peter Ho would have dealt with. And on that note, I would like to welcome Mr. Peter Ho. And before I give to Mr. Peter Ho, I would request our principal, Mr. Busani Ngaweni, to welcome us to the masterclass. Mr. Ngaweni, you have the floor.
Thank you, Secretary for Defense, Ambassador Sonto Kujo. Good morning to you as our facilitator today. Good morning to our guest, Mr. Peter Ho, a fellow of the Civil Service College, and as well as DG Pindi Baleni, DG in the Presidency and the Secretary of Cabinet. Good morning to everyone who's attending here. I see a number of ministers, MECs, heads of departments, national and provinces, and other senior managers. We welcome you to the NSG Masterclass. This Masterclass today is important because a week ago, we entered into an MOU with the Civil Service College of Singapore. It's very good for us as the National School of Government to work with those who've walked this path before and they've mastered the art of delivering quality training programs and build capable bureaucracies as the Civil Service College has done. So we're very excited to have this as a start just a week after signing the MOU. As you are aware, we are running a series of masterclasses where we get eminent people like Peter Ho to come and make these kind of presentations to open up conversations between those who are leading the stage, whether they are elected or appointed. And as you know, we've had students, including the President of the Republic, attending our masterclass. So Peter, we've got very senior members of the executive here, as well as senior managers as part of the bureaucracies. As the NSG, we are opening up a conversation between leading experts as well as those who are leading public service. We've had a number of other masterclasses as well before. As the NSG, this is part and parcel of our continuing leadership engagements. We've got exciting flagship programs. We see very senior and diverse audiences attending our classes. So hopefully some of you, as you leave this masterclass today, you will be registering for a course at the NSG this afternoon. We're doing most of our courses virtually, like this masterclass, because we can reach people in Singapore as we are doing now, and we can reach public servants all over the country at a very limited cost. Partnerships are the future for us. These are some of the partnerships we are delivering training programs with internationally. Locally, in 2 weeks' time, we are signing 10 MOUs with 10 universities, in addition to the 5 who are already co-creating or co-delivering programs with us. So thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you, colleagues, and we look forward to a fruitful engagement. Back to you, DG.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngaweni. And I will now invite our main presenter, Mr. Peter Ho. He's going to have 40 to 45 minutes to take us through his presentation. Mr. Ho, you're welcome, and we wish you a good interaction with the participants that are going to be here. We will invite a few of them to ask questions at the end of this, and I give the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me see. You have, can you see my screen? That's the most important thing.
Not yet.
You can't see my screen. Something has happened. Okay. Share. You can see it now?
Yes, we can see that now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this master class. I'm going to talk about how we navigate in a complex world. And you will realize by the end of the presentation that I've probably raised more questions than I've provided answers, but that's the very nature of the kind of world we live in. And the world we live in is a complex world, as Ambassador Sonto mentioned in her remarks. But one of the things we have to understand about that complex world is everything is connected to everything else. This is an observation which various thinkers over millennia have observed. Everything being connected to everything else. Lenin said this, Leonardo da Vinci mentioned this during the Renaissance, and 3,000 years ago, the famous Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu made the same point. This, for a lot of reasons, which perhaps we can discuss later on, Stephen Hawking, who was the famous theoretical physicist, said that the 21st century will be the century of complexity. So we use terms like, we live in a complex world, the 21st century will be the century of complexity. What do we really mean by this? It's very simple to say that the world is complex, but on the other hand, what is the real context and attributes of complexity? I would say the most important of the attributes of a complex system, a complex world, is the property of emergence. And what does that mean? Imagine that you are in a city. A city is definitely a complex system. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people living in a city. Each person living in that city behaves in a way that is often unpredictable. Sometimes their individual behaviors are hidden from view, but the collective behaviors lead to the property of emergence, which is the aggregate behaviors are often in total unpredictable. And that's what leads to surprise. And this is the property of emergence. In other words, you only know it when you see it. And that's the property of surprise. And of course, there are categories of surprise. The big ones, of course, are surprises like black swans. And I think most of you would have heard of the term black swan, which was coined by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who wrote the book, The Black Swan. And black swans are rare, hard to predict events with a large impact. But there are other types of surprises. And Donald Rumsfeld, not long after the 9/11 attacks, spoke about a close relative of the black swans, which are the unknown unknowns. But let me quote him in total, because these are very important concepts in a complex world. And he said this: there are known knowns. These are things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know that there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know. And these concepts of known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns are actually very important concepts if we want to understand the kind of world which we are operating in. And we're going to be surprised from time to time by known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And let's just take a tour of some of the big surprises which we've experienced in the last few decades. And we can debate whether they are known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, or black swans, but they were big surprises. Collapse of the Soviet Union, 1991, Asian financial crisis, 97, 98, the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the SARS outbreak in November 2002. It lasted till about mid-2003. Then the global economic and financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Brexit, 23rd June 2016. And not long after that, the US presidential elections at the end of 2016. And then most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic, which started sometime in December 2019. Ambassador Sonto said that, we are constantly surprised by change. And the founding Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, said this: "The past was not preordained, nor is the future. There are as many unexpected problems ahead as there were in the past." So societies are changing. Singapore society is changing. I imagine that society in South Africa itself is changing, especially since the end of apartheid. And more than that, it's not just society changing. People are getting better educated. But with changes in society, with better education, expectations also change. And I think all of you will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who developed this idea of a hierarchy of needs. Governments tend to be focused on providing the basic needs, which is food, shelter, jobs, security, law and order. But ironically, when governments deliver on the basic needs, people take those for granted, and then they start to worry about issues which are further up the hierarchy, including needs like their cognitive needs, their aesthetic needs, self-actualization and transcendence needs. And unfortunately, governments are less well placed to meet these needs because these needs are the needs of the individual. And government policies are really focused on meeting the needs of groups of people rather than the needs of individuals. So this is the challenge of rising expectations. And when we have rising expectations, people not only because of better education want jobs, they want jobs with the pay that goes along with it. There's another challenge which is a more recent phenomenon, and that is the world we live in today is very much dominated by the social media. And the social media, ironically, the social networks, which were meant to unify communities, are also being used to split societies. And in 2016, the Oxford dictionaries said that the word of the year, every year they come up with a different word of the year. But in 2016, they said the word of the year was post-truth. And in the post-truth world, objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than emotional appeals and personal beliefs. So this is a new world we live in, a post-truth world. And we see, of course, the phenomenon of fake news and how people are beginning to believe in conspiracy theories, even when there's not necessarily any evidence to back this up. So the phenomenon of conspiracy theories pushed by groups like QAnon, which started in the US but now appear to have spread to Europe, is something that I think is going to create a lot of challenges for government, resulting in a problem. Trust is in crisis. And this is the Edelman Trust Barometer, which does surveys of trust around the world. And for the first time in 2017, they headlined their report, "Trust is in Crisis Around the World," noting that the general population's trust in 4 key institutions, business, government, NGOs, and media, has declined broadly. That means around the world, in total, it's less than 50% trust in these key institutions. And this problem of declining trust has continued since 2017. In 2021, the latest Edelman Trust Barometer shows that trust is generally still in decline. And you'll see, of course, South Africa is, I've highlighted South Africa, but they noted that trust has declined in the US, in China, and elsewhere around the world. And that's a real problem, because if people don't trust their governments, how do governments operate? This seems to be almost like a secular trend. Now, when I talk about change, I'm not just talking about change as a velocity. I'm talking about change as an acceleration. If you may have heard of the something called the Great Acceleration. It's empirical observation that things have accelerated since the end of the Second World War, actually since the 50s. And you can pick this dashboard off Google if you Google it. And I've just taken a part of a much larger dashboard, and I've chosen the socio-economic trends and the ecological trends. And if you notice, everything has started to accelerate since the 50s. On the socio-economic trends, it's not just world population that has accelerated since the 50s. GDP has grown, energy use has accelerated, water use has accelerated, and so on. But on the negative side of the ledger, the ecological trends, carbon dioxide release has accelerated, methane release, surface temperatures, ocean acidification, and so on, all accelerated since the end of the Second World War. So this is something that is unique to this period of our history, acceleration. On technology, many of you would have heard of Moore's Law. Moore's Law is an empirical law which observes that computing power doubles about every 2 years, and that's an acceleration. And since this observation was made in the 50s, indeed, computing power has been doubling about every 2 years. And with this computing power doubling, a lot of technologies which depend on computing power, which depend on semiconductors, have also been changing at that accelerating pace. Tom Friedman, who won the Pulitzer Prize twice, I think, he wrote a book very recently called "Thank You for Being Late." And he subtitles it "An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in an Age of Accelerations." And in this book, he refers to the simultaneous accelerations in technology, globalization, and climate change, all interacting with one another. Two words I'd like to highlight: accelerations and interacting. So technology, as I mentioned, is accelerating, but climate change, I showed the great acceleration the ecological accelerations, globalization also accelerating, but more importantly, they're interacting with one another. And because they're interacting with one another, they're producing outcomes that are very hard to calculate and essentially unpredictable. This is the property of emergence. And this is the challenge of accelerations. If you're in the business of government, living in a world of accelerating change, what's the implication? Your decision cycle is shortening. There's much less time to collect data. There's much less time to understand what that data means. And then there's much less time to make sound decisions. And finally, less time to execute those decisions. So governments are under constant pressure. There's no luxury to sit and wait and collect data, to analyze that data, and then to make the decisions. You just got to make decisions essentially on the fly. Another issue I'd like to point out is the issue of our cognitive biases. We have cognitive biases, we have blind spots. All human beings, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of them have cognitive biases and blind spots. And one of these cognitive biases is something I describe as the black elephant. The black elephant is a cross between the black swan, which we discussed a bit earlier on, and the elephant in the room, which is a problem which is there, which is obvious to everyone. But then we pretend that we ignore it. We prefer that the problem didn't exist. And of course, hoping that nothing will happen during our watch. But when it happens, we pretend as if it was a black swan, but the problem was always there. That's the black elephant. Unfortunately, the black elephant isn't an endangered species. By the way, there's no such thing as a real black elephant. I think these elephants in this photograph have been painted black. I don't know why. I think Ambassador Sonto said that COVID-19 was a black swan. Actually, I don't think the coronavirus was a black swan. I believe it was a black elephant in this sense. In the last century alone, never mind going back a few hundred years and thousands of years into things like the Black Plague and so on. In the last century alone, we have experienced a few pandemics, including the Spanish flu of 1918, then the Hong Kong flu in the 50s, and we had a few near brushes with pandemics, including SARS in 2003, the H1N1 bird flu, MERS, which is the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and then Ebola. All these should have been warnings to the world that we are constantly at risk of very serious contagion. Yet, the world was appeared to have been caught by surprise when the COVID-19 pandemic burst on the scene, first in China in December 2019, then spread rapidly to the rest of the world. Was it a black swan or was it a black elephant? Well, we can debate this for quite a long time. But at any rate, the world was surprised. And we are, in a sense, paying the price today for this surprise because we were all caught woefully unprepared. Margaret Heffernan, who wrote two wonderful books called Willful Blindness and Uncharted, said that we have, over the last 100 years at least, very much fallen in love with the idea that human life is predictable. But of course it isn't. we cannot predict. How do we plan as a government for a future that is inherently unpredictable? If you cannot predict, then you have to use other tools. And one of them is scenario planning. And of course, in South Africa, you're well familiar with the famous Montreux scenarios, which I think came out in 1992. And part of this exercise is, about identifying driving forces, looking for disruptive trends, searching for weak signals. And then it's about telling the stories to try to tease out the very complex meanings of what all these weak signals, emerging trends, and driving forces mean. And let's just go through an exercise to try to see, some of the kinds of trends, weak signals, and driving forces which we should be worried about. And I'll be taking you on quite a meandering tour. But let's start with technology. What does automation and robotics mean? Artificial intelligence. How does that impact on the future of jobs? And, artificial intelligence, robotics are happening around the world, and they are going to affect the future of jobs. And will it lead to more joblessness in countries around the world, in countries like South Africa and Singapore? These are trends we have to watch. And with rising unemployment, and unemployment, as I understand it, is high in South Africa, there's a lot of youth unemployment, and this will lead to growing inequality. And then the consequences of inequality, joblessness, will be a phenomenon which all governments worry about, the rise of xenophobia. And even civil unrest. You can think about the Hong Kong protests in 2019. These were arguably the result of a lot of inequality within Hong Kong. And then let's turn to climate change. The world is undergoing climate change, despite what the climate deniers say. I think climate change is here to stay. And unfortunately, the world is getting both hotter, it's getting wetter and drier at the same time. Last year was among the top 5 hottest years on record. And it's not just getting hotter, but some parts of the world are getting too hot for human beings to live outside an artificial environment, in other words, an air-conditioned environment. And the scientists say that there are some parts of India, some parts of the Gulf, and even some parts of Africa, which will essentially become uninhabitable unless you are rich enough or you can afford to have an air-conditioned home. So this is a problem that is looming over the horizon. And then this could lead to a phenomenon like the day zero problem, which was, I understand, a near-death experience for Cape Town. And then issues like food insecurity.